One core aspect of social conditioning that has the most far-reaching impacts on our physical and mental health is how we are taught to suppress our natural bodily responses and emotions. Research shows a strong link between chronic stress and being raised to disconnect from our internal physical sensations and emotional cues. From a young age, at school and at home, many of us are trained to override what our bodies are telling us. Our bodies are treated as something to be tamed. They shouldn't smell, make noise, fidget, or draw too much attention. Above all, we are not to let the way we feel distract us or interfere with our productivity. We're expected to sit still, stay quiet, look in one direction, listen without interrupting, stay focused, and do as we are told. Many of us were repeatedly reprimanded for being too loud, too wiggly, too messy, too impulsive, too distracting, too much. And we hear things like, no, don't, stop, listen to me, again and again and again. And although this is beginning to change, adults have long used punishment to enforce obedience in children. And I am not a parent, but I deeply respect how hard it is to balance giving the kids the structure and guidance they need while also honoring their individual differences. Parents have the enormous, never-ending responsibility of keeping their children safe, helping them regulate their impulses, especially the risky ones, and teaching empathy and consideration for others. But in many discipline-centered parenting approaches, a genuine desire to nurture a child's growth and well-being gets overshadowed by the drive to enforce obedience or conformity. Whether unconscious or not, the underlying goal becomes either one, teaching children to submit to the will of those above them, or two, changing them to embody more socially desirable traits. And even coercive or control-based parenting often reflects what the parent has learned based on how they themselves were raised or conditioned. Many adults default to punitive strategies simply because they never learned another way. So in order to protect their kids from falling behind or attracting negative attention, they may turn to their own parents, other parents, or community and religious leaders, maybe these days to social media, for guidance on how to raise their child properly. And this makes these parents especially vulnerable to top-down messaging about what it means to be a good, moral person and raise good, successful children. In the process, these parents lose touch with their own instincts about what their child needs and responds best to, just as they teach their children to do the same. For more neurotypical children raised under these rigid standards, it may be easier to ignore their visceral feelings and just focus on thoughts and ideas. But for neurodivergent or more sensitive children, your bodies and nervous systems are wired to be more reactive to other people and their environment. Our society often interprets these natural differences as moral failings. We assume that if one child can succeed in a traditional classroom setting, we all should be able to. And so we're operating on this unspoken belief that children should be able to learn to voluntarily turn their visceral reactions on and off. And those who can't are labeled as having a disorder, a deficit, or a disability. Many of these social expectations come from white Western values that prioritize thinking over feeling, rooted in philosophies like, I think, therefore I am. We're conditioned to believe that being a good person means repressing our visceral feelings and using our thoughts to gain control over ourselves. This creates the illusion that we are able to control our bodies and our feelings through our thoughts. And we begin to mistake who we are for the thoughts in our head. As Gabor Mate writes, and when the body says no, for some of us, it takes disease to finally shatter the illusion of control. After years of trying to think and self-discipline our way through life, we may eventually wake up and realize that we have been driven all along by unseen forces. And these forces don't have to be a great mystery. Most of the time, they boil down to repressed feelings and needs. In many cultures around the world, showing or feeling vulnerable emotions is treated as taboo. And while we're never handed an explicit list of which feelings are off limits, we quickly learn through the reactions of those around us. In some families and cultures, any display of emotion, positive or negative, provokes visible discomfort and withdrawal. So expressing emotion in any unrestrained or unplanned way makes the people around us recoil, shut down, turn away, or try to silence us. In other families and cultures, positive emotions may be more tolerated, but vulnerable, negative feelings are rejected. These negative feelings, like sadness, anger, fear, and confusion, provoke anxiety in the adults around us. Unable to tolerate the lack of control these feelings stir up in them, our caregivers shut down or may become even more distressed than we are. If we can't contain ourselves, they may yell, cry, punish us, or send us away. And most children are quick learners and highly attuned to the moods of the adults around them. So we learn to hide what we feel to avoid rejection, punishment, or the panic of being sent away to deal with these big emotions alone. As hurtful as this emotional dismissal is, many parents respond this way not out of maliciousness, but because they too were never taught how to feel and manage these emotions. As children, though, we don't understand the reason for their reaction. We just know that something about our feelings is wrong, and that people don't like being around us when we show them. And even noticing these bad feelings starting to arise within us can feel deeply threatening. We become afraid of our natural feelings and reactions, and feel wrong in a way we can't fully grasp or understand. So our fear morphs into guilt and shame, not just of our feelings, but of revealing who we really are. And while avoiding our emotions helps us feel safer in the short term, long term it creates a deep sense of helplessness. This learned helplessness makes us believe that our negative emotions are bigger than we are, that they will never end or get better if we ever let ourselves feel them, and that expressing them will drive people away. Eventually, our emotional repression becomes so automatic we no longer recognize the stress that it causes us. Chronic stress eventually stops feeling bad and just becomes our version of normal. If we register any particular feeling, it's often a persistent or underlying guilt. And this guilt is so deflating that we do our best to avoid it too. We double down on our efforts to be a better person, more generous and forgiving, less needy and reactive. By numbing our emotions, we lose touch with the needs beneath them, and we never learn how to express or meet those needs in healthy ways. And repressed feelings don't disappear. They resurface just as vivid and intense as when we first experienced them. They tend to return in situations that echo the pain of our past. And then we're no longer seeing what's happening to us in the present, but we're just reliving that past on repeat. No matter how much we've changed, our lives have changed, we may feel just as vulnerable, afraid, and hurt as we did as children. And the urge to contain our emotions, to stay safe and accepted, feels just as imperative. So as we grow up, we adapt to this pressure by trying out different social roles and ways of masking ourselves until we find what makes ourselves more palatable to others. Over time, these roles become so ingrained, we may have no idea who we would be if we stopped playing them. We've spent so much time and energy scanning and managing others' reactions that our own become a mystery. And this idea of being authentic can feel incredibly complicated and abstract. If we even try, we may only know how to mimic others who seem more confident. We forget that being ourselves starts with something much simpler, noticing and expressing how we feel, which many of us were never taught to do in the first place. So what does filtering out our visceral feelings and sensations do to our brain and body. Over time, it weakens the back and forth communication between the two, which interferes with our brain's ability to register, interpret, and regulate what's happening in our body. And the constant need to monitor ourselves and gauge other people's reactions to us keeps us in a persistent state of hypervigilance. Remaining in this heightened nervous system state eventually alters and rewires our neuroendocrine system, which includes the brain, spinal cord, and hormone-producing glands like the pituitary, thyroid, adrenals, and pancreas. A chronically stressed neuroendocrine system produces elevated baseline levels of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And normally, cortisol actually helps control inflammation in our bodies by calming our immune system. But when stress is chronic, our body stops responding to cortisol properly, which can lead to an overactive immune system and a state of low-grade ongoing inflammation. Stress-induced inflammation is linked to many mental health issues and physical illnesses, some of which can be life-threatening. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the physical illnesses correlated with chronic stress. And I work with a lot of clients who have health-related anxiety or OCD. If that's you, this is a good place in the video to go ahead and skip and pick up on the last part of this video where we talk about healing from chronic stress. Otherwise, let's dive in. We're going to start with Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No, which draws on extensive research to show the connection between chronic stress, emotional suppression, and many of today's most common diseases. A growing body of research shows that the leading global risk factors for cancer are behavioral, and include things like tobacco use, alcohol use, unsafe sex, and disordered eating. Many of these high-risk or addictive behaviors are coping mechanisms for managing chronic stress and numbing emotional pain. People who habitually suppress their emotions, lack emotional closeness, and have difficulty asserting their needs face a higher risk of developing cancer, and when they do, they're more likely to experience more aggressive forms of the disease. These emotional patterns are observed specifically in breast cancer, lung cancer, and hormone-related cancers of the reproductive system. Looking beyond cancer, autoimmune and inflammatory conditions also show strong links to emotional suppression. These are illnesses in which the body's immune system mistakenly attacks its own healthy tissues, leading to chronic inflammation and tissue damage. Common examples include Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, chronic fatigue, and multiple sclerosis. Research shows that people diagnosed with these conditions often share a cluster of psychological patterns, including high conscientiousness or self-discipline, excessive stoicism, difficulty asking for help, and fear of abandonment. And these are not necessarily innate personality traits, but adaptive coping strategies that we use to stay safe and accepted. And in Gabor Mate's interviews, many of his patients initially described their childhoods as normal and happy, but when asked any specific questions or to elaborate, they later revealed that their caregivers often struggled to meet their emotional needs, which left them feeling emotionally alone or abandoned. And repeated experiences of having their feelings dismissed taught them to suppress their emotions and prioritize other people's needs in order to preserve connection. Mate observes a similar pattern in individuals with ALS, which is a neurodegenerative disease that progressively shuts down the central nervous system. Certain personality traits or coping styles, like conscientiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion, are currently thought to be risk factors for ALS. Mate refers to this cluster of traits as niceness, a socially rewarded disposition that, when not balanced with assertiveness or the healthy expression of anger, can lead to blurry boundaries and a weakened sense of self. Other examples of central nervous system dysregulation include irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, and chronic pain disorders. In these cases, the nervous system becomes hypersensitive, which lowers our pain threshold and causes our brains to interpret harmless signals as painful. You can think of it like having the volume knob for pain turned up too high. Finally, research also indicates that chronic stress increases our risk for Alzheimer's disease. Amongst Alzheimer's patients, research also notes this common theme, this heightened fear of emotional closeness and difficulty managing negative emotions and stress. Taken together, this body of research paints a compelling picture. Long-term suppression of emotion does not just affect our mental health, it shapes our physical health in profound and sometimes life-altering ways. Gabor shares this research, and I include it here not to scare or blame anyone. We are already doing enough of that. The goal is for this to be preventative, to wake us up to the constant stress that so many of us are silently living with. And learning about the root causes and effects of chronic stress can bring up many mixed emotions. You may feel, as I did learning about this, the urge to blame someone. Your parents, your culture, even yourself. And sometimes blame can be helpful for a period if it gives us the space to finally feel our long-buried anger. But staying stuck in blame may be a sign that a part of you is still in denial and unconsciously refusing to accept what happened to you and your inability to change this. After all we know about stress and trauma, we will do almost anything to not feel powerless. But acceptance does not make us helpless. It is what gives us the power to hold others accountable and to take responsibility for ourselves and our lives again. And that brings us back to the two hard truths we started with. Growing up in our families and cultures should not have hurt so much. And yet for many of us, it did. If you can see and accept that, then what? Healing from chronic stress doesn't mean you have to identify every root cause, spend years analyzing your past, or talk through every trauma and stressor. You also don't need to change your entire personality and express emotions in some way that doesn't feel authentic to you. What healing does require is a gradual unlearning of the conditioning that taught you to ignore your body and your feelings. We unlearn so that we can remember what we already know, how we feel and why we feel it. And with practice and support, you'll also learn how to act on what you know, how to manage and express your emotions, and develop flexible, compassionate strategies to meet your needs. Emotional maturity and being physically and mentally healthy can look so many different ways. So as overwhelming as this healing process might feel right now, just remember that emotional competence boils down to knowing two things. Number one, all of your feelings are natural, valid, and have something important to tell you. And number two, you can learn to regulate even the most painful emotions and respond to them in ways that feel grounding and satisfying. In therapy, we call this healing process corrective emotional experiences. These are moments when you're met with real acceptance and support while showing up however messy and vulnerable you actually feel. And these healing experiences can literally rebuild our brain architecture and rewire our nervous system. Over time, your normal can feel freer, safer, and more loving than anything you have ever known.